There are some folks out there who wonder why people would root for Scott Frost to do well at UCF. And there are some folks who are like, why do we talk about Scott Frost? Why do we even bring him up? Why? Like, you're really searching hard for content and clickbait stuff. And I'm like, well, he was interesting at Oregon. I mean, I knew what he was doing at Kansas State because people were talking about him when he was being an assistant coach there. He was obviously very intriguing at UCF, former national championship winning quarterback, former Nebraska head coach. I mean, I look at Bo Pelini. You know, that's a guy I played for him for a year. So that's a guy that's always going to be intriguing to me. And any Nebraska football coach or guy that used to coach here, Solich and any of these guys, or guys who used to play and had success on a rare and unique level, they're going to be intriguing and I think noteworthy and worthy of talking about. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole on this because there's all sorts of thoughts out there. And, you know, there's the quote that I've seen, and I quote, "I'm never going to talk about that," end quote, Scott Frost. And then he inevitably ends up talking about Nebraska without directly naming Nebraska a lot. He talked about, you know, he was happy at UCF. He doesn't come out and say it, but basically wasn't really dying to leave and kind of came to Nebraska because other people wanted him to do it. Which I'll be honest with you, I got that impression at the time. He never said it to me, but I got that impression. Do you remember the picture? I think it was the day of his introductory press conference. He's walking up the stairs into the stadium. Now, it's a freezing cold day in December, okay? But he's kind of like looking down. He's in his suit. The hands are in his pockets, but he's like kind of like looking at the ground. He doesn't, in this one picture, okay, and I've seen other pictures, but this picture always stood out to me. He doesn't look like a guy that's like got a pep in his step and let's light this candle. He looks like a guy that's here because he's supposed to be here. That's how that picture. Do you know what picture I'm talking about?
Not specifically, but you described it pretty well.
Like, that's how even at the time, that's how the picture struck me. And I remember, obviously, the press conference that day. I remember all the former players that were in the weight room that day there to support him, you know, and he kind of was like, you know, I welcome all former players supporting ideas unless they're bad ideas, which was actually a pretty funny joke. I don't know. It's tough when people at this point in time, it's kind of like, do we root for Scott Frost? Do we not root for Scott Frost? You know, whatever. And everybody's got different feelings. And some people are like, don't talk about Scott Frost, but he's noteworthy. I'm on the side that he's noteworthy. Like, to me, he's interesting. He was interesting before he was ever our coach for multiple reasons. Okay. As far as rooting for Scott Frost, you know, it's challenging to a degree. Just because things really didn't go well here. There was, you know, maybe not an entire realm of accountability that was taken. At least it feels that way. When I watch what he's doing at UCF, I don't find myself rooting for him or against him. I find myself like, what the hell's going to happen down there? And I'm very curious about it. That's what I find myself thinking. Like, I'm not like, ooh, I hope it doesn't go well, or I hope he does really, really well. I'm just kind of like, what's going to happen? Like, it's just intriguing to me. You know, and there's a bunch of stats, you know, in 6 seasons plus another 3 games, he's only had one team that was above 500, and that was his undefeated season, undefeated team as well. There's all these different things out there. And I've been of the mindset, like, Solich eventually came back. A lot of these guys eventually come back, you know, if things don't go well. Even in WWE, Vince McMahon is one of the most proud, arrogant, pompous people you could ever meet. Yet every single wrestler he ever had an issue with, except for one, came back. Name one that didn't. Now, CM Punk was more Triple H, a little bit of Vince McMahon in there. CM Punk just came back. But you think about the Ultimate Warrior came back, a guy who held him up for more money right before a major pay-per-view at SummerSlam. And he said he would give him more money. The Ultimate Warrior goes out and he has to fire him afterwards because he can't accept that. But he had to give the fans what he had advertised, which was the Warrior and Hogan and all these guys in some sort of a tag match at SummerSlam. I forget exactly what it was. Bruno Sammartino. Those were about as harsh of feelings as you could ever imagine. And if you don't know who that is, think of Austin before Steve Austin. Think of Hulk Hogan before Hulk Hogan. Think of that type of guy. All right. They always would end up coming back. The only guy who didn't was Macho Man Randy Savage. There's a whole bunch of rumor and innuendo about that. Ultimately, he unfortunately passed away, I believe, in a car crash like a decade ago or something like that. So I'm sure that obviously played a role in that. But my point is, I've always been of the mindset that I think one day Scott Frost will come back. I think it's going to be longer than Solich. I think it's going to be longer. I think Husker fans will probably be part of that that picture, if it does develop and come into form, I think Frost has got to be part of that if it does develop and come into form. I think it's going to take longer, and I think part of that is, obviously Frost feels a certain kind of way. There's Husker fans who would be open to it. There's some that wouldn't. I think it's going to take long. Like, what was Solich, about 20 years? I mean, with Frost, it might be 40 years, but that's an entire generation of people who are going to be like, what's everyone so mad about? Why don't we bring this guy back? And then ultimately at that point, I think it would be up to Frost, in my opinion. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, Jake? For me, again, I'm not like, ooh, I hope he does really great. I hope he does really bad. I'm just like, what's going to happen? Can he replicate at UCF once again what they did one season down there? They are technically in a Power 4 conference now, not one of the big two, but technically a Power 4 conference, so probably a little bit harder. But I do know he was really, really happy down there at one point. Can they reach that level of success again? What do you think? Should this even be talked about, Jake? And what are your thoughts on it as a whole, in addition to that?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. A lot of people are going to have their feelings about it, obviously. And I might be a little bit different. Everybody kind of has their different rules or whatever it might be. I still cheer for Bill Callahan. Some people might not, right? So I kind of like the people that have been through the program, even if it doesn't succeed. It usually isn't from a lack of want to. Now, you can argue on Scott Frost a lot of different reasons about why it didn't work out here, but I still kind of think back to him and his playing days. It's kind of the same thing with Trev Alberts. Like, man, these guys just had unbelievable careers. Now, when they pass the player mode and they come back as an AD or as a coach, maybe it didn't quite work out. And but something short of Scott Frost saying screw Jake Bakoven or Nebraska needs to burn alive as a state. I'm going to be cheering.
Wow. That escalated quickly.
I'm going to be cheering for Scott Frost. And I don't think he's always makes the best moves, but I'm intrigued too. Like, what is the football in totality reaction to if Scott Frost succeeds again at UCF? Is there going to be more interest? Is he going to want to move up? I mean, he kind of already talked about how he shouldn't have left the first time. But to me, what kind of separates it is that it's not like that's what I always kind of think, like Pelini. If they would have let Pelini go and he would have went and got a job at whatever school, but just a major school somewhere in the Big 12, and was having success there, how would people feel? I think there would be like questions back. Should we fired him? Now that he's doing well here, this and that. The Scott Frost, there's no argument to me. I think he had an extended stay longer than what I believe he should have had. I think he probably should have been fired after 4 years. So there's never an idea in my mind of, well, what if you would have had more time, or maybe we should bring him back? No, we've been through that. So I can cheer for him without having any sort of feelings of what does this mean for Nebraska. I already know what it meant. I lived through it. It wasn't good. And Nebraska's moved on, and I hope most people will. But, it's always going to get clicks, always going to get interest, and I'm one of those people clicking because I do still support. I would say I can't really think of any ex-Husker that I'm like, yeah, I just throw them away. I'm not interested in them anymore.
I do think it's interesting. It's obviously polarizing. The folks out there who are like, oh, nothing to talk about. Have you ever listened to my show? I can't get everything in 2 hours. There's plenty to talk about. All right. And then it's not just my show. It's anybody who has a show or writes an article. There goes the accusations of, oh, you're just trying to get clickbait. I send you the headline before every single show. Now, sometimes you have to tweak it based on amount of characters and does it fit or not fit or whatever. But essentially, you have an idea of what we're going to talk about. Did you have any idea we were going to talk about Frost today?
I did not.
It's not even in the headline of this show. Not on purpose. It's just simply, I want to talk about the O-line, baseball and softball, and that's all the room we had for the characters for the show today. So for the headline for the show today. So for me, if you don't, I don't want to say it's disrespectful if you don't talk about him, because now you're almost like ignoring him, like he doesn't exist. I don't know that I'm going to take that stance, but I do believe it is noteworthy to be talked about for reasons I've already laid out. I think it's how it's outlined, how things are approached, and what is exactly said. I do think there is kind of this interesting, very passionate fan base. Yes. I remember when I played, if a team came in and beat us in Lincoln, the fans would clap for them, tell them good game as they walked off. So very classy fans. I do think, keep it in mind, not everything that every former player ever does, people are going to love. So, and there's levels to that, I might add. There are levels to that. Let's be clear. Okay. But to me, I'll never be able to disregard that they wore the jersey, they represented the N, and I will never be able to disregard that, barring that they just attacked Jake Bakoven. They attack Jake and they're dead to me.
That's right.
Outside of that, I'd have a hard time, or what'd you say? Tell them the state to burn, which that did escalate quickly. Outside of that, I have a hard time disregarding that. Do we have anything off the text line? Anything from the show so far?
I say you mentioned Frost, and people do have opinions. There's some that I just won't read because they're not appropriate. But Corey says you need to consider that Solich actually had winning seasons, unlike Frost, literally one of, if not the worst, football coaches in Nebraska history.
When it comes to wins and losses, it'd be hard to argue. I mean, I remember saying on a show, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, I'm like, if you look at wins and losses, it's the least successful coaching tenure a Nebraska football coach has had since the 50s. So from a purely numbers, facts standpoint, it is hard to argue that, yes. I've often wondered, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but I often wonder what would have happened had Solich not been let go. That's obviously been debated 1,000 times. But that's a fair point. Hard to argue with that.
Yeah, and then some other people, like Eric says, how dare you, Bach, even mention he who shall not be named, which is somebody that I brought up that maybe have went to Texas. Jesse says, I can't think of any ex-Husker you won't root for right now. What about Trev? So the people are not liking my response that I might not be rooting against Trev. Big Haas says, if I had to take an ex-Husker player that would have to throw away, it would be Sam Keller. So still kind of burnt from that all those years
He didn't
ago.
just say not root for. He said throw away.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. Couple things. I know you got a lot of text there. So I have admitted publicly, I have a personal soft spot for Trev Alberts. All right. I do. And part of it is he was always really good to me. But beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of people who are really good to me. But he helped me out a couple of times when I asked for help. Stuff like that matters to me. All right. But the one memory I just can't shake that I will share, when Mickey Joseph was the interim coach. So the last 8 games, what would have been Scott Frost year 5 or whatever, but the last 8 games, we came to a practice. Mickey was great, chatted with him, all that good stuff. Trev walks over. You know, he's the AD. He's got his 3-piece suit, tie, dress shoes. My daughter, who is now 7, I believe was 4 or 5 at the time. And out of nowhere, to Trev, she goes, I can beat you in a race. And I'm just like, where did that come from? Just out of nowhere. We're in the Hawk Center. So he's like, all right, let's race. And he lines up, puts his front foot on the 20-yard line, said, let's race to that end zone. And so he races, I think she was 5, just turned 5, my 5-year-old daughter to the end zone. And of course, he lets her win. And I can't get that image out of my mind. So when it comes to Trev, I will readily admit how things ended, not great. I do have a soft spot for him. So for me, I'm very open and honest about that. So when people are not rooting for Trev or whatever the case may be, I have a hard time joining that camp because at the end of the day, while I'm as professional as I possibly can be, I can't get that image of Trev Alberts in a suit and fancy dress shoes racing my 5-year-old daughter in the Hawks. I can't get that image out of my mind. Everyone's probably mad at me now because how dare I not just, be all negative about this. But anyways, go ahead.
I was like, coming off that thought, D-Train says those who leave and go to Texas, screw them. So maybe
technically Texas A&M, but I get his point. Yeah.
And Eric says, I was actually wrong. I thought that he was saying he who shall not be named was Trev Alberts, but he says that's Billy Seabach. Come on, we don't talk about him.
I thought it was interesting when you said you were rooting for Bill Callahan. By the way, Billy C, Joe Daly, really?
Yeah.
Is that the Joe Daly poll?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I do remember that spring game. He was the only quarterback we blitzed all day.
Was he really?
Yeah.
I remember he was like the 4th quarterback, and it was the start of the previous year.
I don't remember I could be wrong, but I remember somebody mentioned an article afterwards, one of the few that I paid attention to as a player, and they were like, Joe Daly was the only quarterback that was blitzed all day in that spring game. And I was like, man, I don't remember blitzing anybody. I don't have the exact call sheet, but you might be right. There might have been a little something to that, which is why Billy C was born. All right, go ahead.
That's about it. Again, there's a few that I can't read.
There's a few that you can't read?
Yeah.
All right. You got any final thoughts on this, Bach, before we move on?
Not necessarily. Again, and I don't tell people how to root one way or the other, right? But I do think it's odd that it's gotten to the point that prominent Nebraska journalists are saying, "Hey, you shouldn't root for Nebraska." And go and read the article. He didn't quite say that. You shouldn't root for Scott Frost. Excuse me. That's how much. I mean, that's what I say. Like, did he personally pee in your Cheerios or something that you're that upset about? I mean, I know it wasn't good. I know he could do a better job reflecting on it. But to me, he's still. I mean, he was a head coach. He's a quarterback on a national championship team. And you know, I've gone to the university. I've done what I can, but it's far more than what I've put into the university.
To answer your question, I think there's a lot of Husker fans who feel like their Cheerios were peed in. I'm just saying a lot of Husker fans feel that way. Again, for me, anybody who wore the red, represented the N, it's hard for me to get that out of my mind. And it's a slippery slope. If I don't want to say people start turning on guys like this, but I think with Frost, it's hard. I said several times he's hurting himself in front of the media. He needs someone to, and I think there's people at the university who are supposed to help the head coach with this, but he needs like a publicist, someone to help him in those press conferences because he's drastically hurting himself. And then the on-field play wasn't great. I think since then, you know, if he's going to say things like, I'm not going to talk about that, then don't talk about it. Don't say I'm not going to talk about it and then vaguely, clearly talk about it. You know, and at some point, if there was ever something said just simply to the effect of, hey, I could have done things better or different, maybe that would help. It doesn't even have to be like an apology or a full-blown, just something hinted that way might help. In fairness to the people who are just like, you know, I'm not going to root for this guy ever, no matter what. I think that would shape how they'd see things a little bit differently if there was just an acknowledgement of, hey, maybe I could have done things a little bit different. Maybe it could have gone a little bit better had I done this or that. And I think that goes a long way with people. So